While Lin's teachers were out hunting down the remaining human traitors from the demon worshippers, a few managed to slip through the cracks, and they had a plan. They used the chaos to tail Lin into a dungeon, then offered themselves up as sacrifices, and ended up summoning the Flame Demon Lord. The second Lin saw it, his expression shifted. He instantly recognized it was Flame. Its body was massive, way bigger and stronger than the Minotaur clone he'd fought before, but Lin could tell it lacked divine-level aura, so he scoffed and remarked that this version of Flame looked weak. Maybe it was due to a lack of power, or perhaps the dungeon rules were suppressing it. Flame actually praised Lin for being sharp, then casually dismissed the concern and asserted that even if this body couldn't unleash 10% of its full power, it was still more than enough to kill him. Meanwhile, the creatures crawling out of the flames began mutating. One of them, a Highland wolf, stepped out slowly, its levels surging right before Lin's eyes. But Lin just laughed it off and declared that Flame couldn't kill him here. In fact, he couldn't have picked a worse place. This was Beast God Plateau, a place where he could make everything his weapon. Just like that, he leapt into the air, summoned his wings, and darted deeper into the dungeon. Flame, thinking he was trying to escape, remarked that Lin was dreaming if he thought he could run, then promised to burn him until nothing remained. With that, he launched a skill. An enormous eye materialized behind him, blasting death beams toward our boy. But Lin zipped through the air in a tight zigzag, effortlessly dodging each shot. In seconds, he crossed another bridge. By now, he already has a plan, and he knows this fight has only one win condition. He needs to utilize Corpse Explosion and Mighty Soldiers to land a kill shot. He notes that he can't waste any time and there won't be a second chance. He summoned his scythe and sent the little skellies out to scatter and lure enemies while he held Flame back solo. Once they split up, Lin suddenly halted mid-air and used Soul Summon. First came the Insect King. Lin gave the order, and the Insect King unleashed a sonic wave, but Flame wasn't even phased. In a blink, he was already face-to-face with the Insect King. He sneered at the tiny bug and grabbed it in one motion, burning it to ashes in the next. Lin hadn't expected much from the Insect King due to it being clearly out-leveled, but the delay was way shorter than he'd hoped. There was no time to hesitate, and he quickly summoned the Earth Dragon God. Flame raised a brow, a little surprised this time, and even remarked that Lin had quite a few tricks up his sleeve. The Dragon God lashed out with its tail, nailing Flame in the gut with precision. But it barely did a thing. Instead, cracks spidered across the Dragon God's body. Flame just burst out laughing, clearly amused. He had already seen through Lin's strategy, noting that he was stalling for time. So he grabbed the Dragon God and smashed it repeatedly into the ground. Another giant eye appeared, unleashing multiple beams across the floor in a wild barrage of death beams. Flame's laughter echoed from behind, and by the time Lin turned, the Demon Lord was already closing in. He seemed to enjoy the chase, mocking Lin for slowing down, but deep down, even he was surprised. In such a short time, Lin had not only unlocked flying ability, but could summon this many powerful creatures. That realization made one thing clear, that Lin had to die, no matter what. The massive eye returned, firing even more death beams than before. Flame remarked that keeping Lin alive would only bring ruin to the abyss. He had to be wiped out early. Lin dodged swiftly, but even he had to admit a Demon Lord's strength. Neither of his soul summons had bought him much time, and the sheer number of beams alone was already overwhelming. Losing focus for a fraction of a second got him into trouble. A giant fist came crashing down, too fast to fully dodge. In a split-second reaction, he reinforced his skeletal armor, but still got smashed straight into the ground, leaving behind a deep crater. The armor shattered instantly. Even with damage transfer in play, Lin coughed up blood, a harsh reminder of what real Demon Lord power felt like. Before he could recover, another giant eye appeared overhead. Still hovering mid-air, Flame remarked that Lin had finally come down and planned to end him. With that, wave after wave of death beams rained down. He thought it was over, but suddenly, countless red shackles were shot towards him. Flame didn't expect Lin to be still alive. The withering curse landed clean, a red skull hovering above Flame's head. Our boy followed up with Soul Flame, burning the Demon Lord so hard he screamed in agony and swore to tear Lin apart piece by piece. Enraged, Flame lost it as dozens of eyes emerged behind him, all firing death beams in a storm of destruction. Lin scrambled to his feet and took off running. His low agility made his retreat look messy, but he narrowly avoided a beam that grazed right past his face. Using that window, he threw his skeletal armor back on, and seizing the opening, hit Flame with another Soul Flame. The screaming started again, and the beams finally stopped. Covering his head, Flame for some reason laughed. He acknowledged that Lin's growth was terrifying, commenting that if left unchecked, he'd become a massive threat to the abyss. Meanwhile, the little skellies were still hacking away at the mutated monsters. As more fell, Lin figured it was almost time. In the meantime, each skeleton now dragged multiple corpses, rushing toward him. In the distance, dust clouds rose, and our boy's trusty skellies had finally arrived, and he declared it was finally time. He summoned the undead general, who raised his scepter and used its buffing skill. A red glow pulsed across every skeleton, but it wasn't enough to impress Flame. He remarked that this was just more cannon fodder being sent to die. Beams cut through the air, wiping out over 20 skeletons in seconds. Another 60 were left barely hanging on. The undead general kept swinging his scepter, healing himself and the rest of the skellies as fast as he could. Watching them slowly recover, Flame sneered, saying even with healing, these summons wouldn't last long. But just as he finished mocking, something flew toward him. Before he could react, a monster's corpse began swelling and exploded violently right in front of his face. Flame raised an arm to shield himself and scoffed, saying he had seen this skill before, then called it weak, while noting this kind of damage was barely a scratch. He figured he had just been too cautious. More corpses came flying his way, and this time the explosions packed serious heat. Even Flame let out a muffled grunt, the blast briefly shaking him, but all it really did was enrage him further. He roared Lin's name, spat curses, and declared that it was time for Lin to face his death. Flames surged higher around his body, spreading out in a massive wave that instantly scorched over 50 skeletons that were nearest to him. The damage was brutal, but Lin had been expecting this. The rest of the skellies had all arrived, and what happened earlier was just stalling for time, because he only needed one shot. He summoned the rest of the skeletons, then activated Mighty Soldiers. 30 seconds was all he had. Every stat across himself and the skeletons skyrocketed by 200%, and their damage shot up by 500%. As this was happening, he hurled every available corpse toward the Demon Lord. The explosion that followed was immense, shaking the entire dungeon. But when the smoke cleared, Flame was still standing, charred, but very much alive. He remarked that this kind of damage wouldn't be enough to kill him. Lin already knew that, and noted this wasn't the real finisher. The stat boost from Mighty Soldiers was his actual trump card, with his stats now surging far beyond his usual limits, and after all the growth he'd undergone recently, Lin appeared right in front of the Demon Lord and launched Soul Flame point blank. This time, the skill wrapped around Flame's entire body, searing into every inch. The Demon Lord howled, writhing in agony. Even though he'd tried to brace himself, he hadn't expected the pain to be this much worse. His voice shook with panic as he demanded to know what this skill was. But Lin didn't waste time responding, and every second counted. Multiple giant eyes spawned behind the Demon Lord, death beams charging up once again. Instead of retreating, our boy charged straight through the beams. Lin knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Watching Flame constantly regenerate, he realized he had to cut off that healing somehow. Reinforcing his skeletal armor first, he landed and dropped Venomous Ring. Toxic mist spread across the field, catching Flame off guard. Just then, the ranged skeletons took their positions and opened fire. With the buffs applied from Undead General as well as Mighty Soldiers, the pressure started to mount. Flame staggered slightly, then roared furiously, declaring that Lin had truly pushed him over the edge this time. But the skeletal berserker had joined the action. They charged in with raised axes, giving Flame no room to breathe. Time was slipping fast, and only 15 seconds were left. Wounded and bloodied, Flame looked visibly shaken. He began to realize his power was being drained. He lashed out, smashing the closest skeleton with a brutal punch, but the others activated their rampage annihilation with each blow, now dealt 500% of its own strength as damage to the target. With their axes gleaming red as another wave of skellies surged forward, Flame fought back, firing off more death beams. But the skeletons had to hold the line because if they fell now, it was all over. The Undead General raised his scepter and pumped out Legion healing non-stop, keeping the army on their feet. More attacks landed and time was ticking down. Then there was sudden silence, and the roaring stopped. Our boy then glanced around warily. A deafening boom tore through the ground like a volcanic eruption. A mushroom cloud surged upward, and a rain of fire began to fall from the sky. But our boy didn't lower his guard, and if anything, he became more alert. There was no system prompt, no kill confirmation, and that only meant Flame wasn't dead. Then came the footsteps through the smoke. A frail-looking demon emerged and turned out to be Flame's true form. Lin scoffed, remarking that he looked absolutely pathetic now. But Flame just grinned and announced that it was over. Lin was going to die. In an instant, Flame's body swelled violently. Lin's instincts screamed danger, but the blast came too fast. His skeletal armor shattered again, and he barely managed to shield himself with his arms. He cursed under his breath. These damn demons always do this. Luckily, Mighty Soldiers was still active, and with damage transfer and lifelink kicking in just in time, he was able to tank it. Flame stared in disbelief and couldn't believe our boy was still alive. Though his clothes were burned off, Lin stood firm, shirtless, a bit charred, but pants intact. Calmly, he remarked that it was time for Flame to go. As Flame's body began to dissolve, he unleashed one last curse. He said it's a curse from a divine level and no one can ever remove it, then declared that Lin would never level up again, that his skills would be sealed, and that even if he didn't die today, his future would be ruined. What followed was a surge of purple energy shot straight toward him. Flame emphasized this was the end of him, and even if he couldn't kill Lin now, then he'd make sure Lin would suffer forever, haunted by this moment. And just like that, Flame disappeared for good. But as the cursed energy touched Lin, it vanished. His status immunity passive is activated, and every negative effect will be instantly cleansed. Curse or not, it was still just a status. The system then notified him, defeating the soul clone of the Flame Demon Lord, gaining him 900 million experience on the spot, and enough merits to gain a full star. Golden light exploded skyward as he leveled up again and again, stopping at level 48. A smile crossed his face, and he was happy to see that the fight had paid off big time. He didn't plan to stick around, but when he teleported back to the dungeon hall, what greeted him left him stunned. The entire place was in ruins. Scorch marks and shattered ground were everywhere, and bodies lay across the wreckage. Without hesitation, Lin began helping the wounded. One barely conscious student saluted him the moment he saw Lin and reported that the battle was over. The demon worshippers had infiltrated the academy, but they'd all been purged. Lin urged him to stay calm and asked him to start from the beginning. At the same time, deep in the abyss, fire rained from the skies. A small demon looked up in horror, noting something had happened to Lord Flame. Inside the Flame Palace, Flame stood there looking weakened. He had lost 1/10 of his soul as a result, noting that if he had lost just a bit more, he would have lost his Demon Lord title entirely. His furious roar echoed through the palace. Had already lost count of how many times he had said this, but the dude once again claimed he will one day destroy Lin by his own hands.